Hey, what is up everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There are secrets in this universe that refuse to be told. Truths that slip through the fingers of those who reach for them like sand through an hourglass. In the grim darkness of the far future, where 10,000 years of war have written their stories across the stars in blood and fire, where gods and monsters walk among mortals and the line between salvation and damnation blurs with every passing century, there exists one figure whose very existence defies explanation. One warrior whose name is spoken in hushed whispers across a million worlds. One enigma that has haunted the first legion of the Adeptus Astartes since the days when the Emperor still walked among his sons. His name, if it can even be called that, is Cipher. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the weight of the day slip from your shoulders. Allow yourself to drift into that space between waking and dreaming, where stories come alive and ancient mysteries unfold like flowers opening to an alien sun. What I am about to tell you is not simply a tale of war or betrayal, though it contains both in abundance. It is not merely a chronicle of heresy or redemption, though these threads weave throughout its fabric. What I'm about to share with you is the story of a question that has persisted for 10,000 years without answer. A riddle wrapped in ceramite and cloaked in bone-white robes. A phantom who moves through the shadows of the Imperium with purposes that remain forever unclear. Welcome to the story of Cypher, the Lord of the Fallen, the most mysterious character in Warhammer 40,000. To understand Cypher is to understand that some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some questions exist not to receive answers, but to remind us that the universe is far larger and stranger than our minds can comprehend. In a setting defined by its darkness, by its hopelessness, by the endless grinding machinery of war, Cypher represents something rare and precious. He represents uncertainty. He represents the possibility that things are not always what they seem. That even in a galaxy where gods feast on the souls of the damned and the forces of chaos threaten to consume everything humanity has built, there might still be players on the board whose moves no one can predict. Think of him as a ghost in power armor, a specter that appears when doom gathers on the horizon, whose presence heralds change and whose departure leaves only questions in its wake. The Dark Angels. Chapter of the Adeptus. Astartes have hunted him for millennia. They have dedicated their most elite warriors to his capture. They have forsaken victories and abandoned missions at the mere rumor of his presence. Yet, he has never been successfully brought to their justice. He has slipped through their fingers time and time again, leaving behind only confusion and the unsettling suspicion that perhaps they are not the hunters in this eternal game, but the hunted. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Stories, like journeys, must begin at the beginning. And to understand who Cypher is, or at least to appreciate the magnificent complexity of who he might be, we must first travel back in time. Back to an age when the Emperor's dream still burned bright. Back to a world of endless forests and terrible beasts, where knightly orders rode forth to do battle with creatures that should not have existed. Back to Caliban. Come with me now. Let us walk together through the shadows of history. Let us explore the origins of a title that would come to mean so much, and let us begin to unravel the threads of a mystery that spans 10,000 years. The ancient world of Caliban and the Order. Before we dive deeper into this tale, I want you to imagine something. Imagine a world where the sun is a distant memory, where daylight filters through layers of canopy so thick that it arrives at the forest floor as a mere whisper of illumination. Imagine trees so old that they were ancient when humanity first set foot on this world during the dark age of technology, their trunks wide enough to serve as fortresses, at their roots descending into the planet's crust, like the fingers of slumbering giants. Imagine walking through this forest, knowing that every shadow might contain a predator designed by nature, or something worse to end your existence in the most painful way possible. This was Caliban. The air was perpetually humid, thick with the scent of decay and growth intermingled in equal measure. Sounds traveled strangely through the undergrowth, sometimes muffled into silence by the denseness of the vegetation, sometimes amplified and distorted, until the cry of a small animal became the roar of a nightmare creature. The colonists who had settled this world during humanity's golden age had not tamed it. They had merely survived it, building their fortresses in clearings carved from the forest with fire and blade, at defending those clearings with every weapon at their disposal. And they had created the knightly orders, long before the Emperor found his lost son on this deadly world, before the Great Crusade brought the light of imperial truth to that dark and forested realm. There existed a civilization of knights, not the gilded warriors of some fairy tale kingdom, but hardened men who lived and died by their blades in a world that wanted nothing more than to consume them. Caliban was classified by imperial cartographers as a death world, and that designation barely did justice to the horrors that lurked beneath its canopy. Picture a planet swathed entirely in forests so vast and so dark that sunlight never reached the ground in many places. Imagine trees so ancient that their trunks stretched hundreds of meters into the sky, their branches interweaving to create a ceiling of perpetual twilight beneath which nightmares walked. These were not ordinary forests filled with ordinary dangers. The woods of Caliban were home to what the natives called the great beasts, monsters twisted by energies that no one at the time understood. We know now that Caliban was tainted by the warp, that its proximity to what would become the Eye of Terror had corrupted the very fabric of its ecosystem. The great beasts came in countless forms, each more terrible than the last. Some were massive predators, all tooth and claw and insatiable hunger, capable of tearing apart armored knights as easily as a man might tear paper. Others were more subtle, creatures that hunted through illusion and deception, luring their prey into ambushes from which there was no escape. As still others defied easy categorization, entities that seemed to phase in and out of reality, that struck from impossible angles, that left their victims transformed into something unrecognizable. The psychological toll of living alongside such horrors cannot be overstated. Every generation of Calibanites grew up knowing that death might come at any moment, from any direction, in any form. They developed a culture of vigilance, of constant readiness, of martial excellence, born not from ambition, but from desperate necessity. Their knights were not romantic figures in shining armor seeking glory and honor. They were grim defenders, fighting an eternal war against extinction itself. But to the people who lived there, these were simply facts of existence. The beasts hunted in the darkness, the knights hunted the beasts, and the cycle continued generation after generation in an endless dance of death. Among the many knightly orders that arose to protect humanity on this deadly world, none was more prestigious than the Order. Founded on principles of martial excellence and unwavering dedication, the Order produced warriors whose names became legends even among the legendary. Two names rose above all others in those ancient days. The first was Luther, a knight of such skill and charisma that he had become the foremost hero of his age. The second was a child he found wandering in the monster-haunted forests, a boy who would grow to eclipse even Luther's considerable fame. That child was Lionel Johnson, though he would not receive that name until Luther gave it to him. Found naked and wild in the depths of the forest, but covered in the blood of the great beasts he had somehow survived against, the young Primarch was a mystery from his first breath on Caliban. How had he survived? What had happened during the years he spent alone in that green hell? These questions were never answered, and the absence of answers would echo through millennia. Consider the impossibility of his survival. A child, even a Primarch child, alone in forests that routinely killed trained knights in full armor. No food but what could be hunted or gathered from an environment designed to kill anything that moved. No shelter but what could be improvised from hostile materials. No companionship but the howling of predators and the endless darkness of the forest. For years, perhaps a decade or more, the young lion lived like this. Not just survived, but thrived, yet growing stronger with each passing day, becoming a predator himself rather than prey. Some theorize that the Watchers in the Dark protected him during those early years, guiding him away from the most dangerous creatures and towards sources of sustenance. Others believe that the great beasts themselves recognized something in the young Primarch that stayed their killing instincts, an alpha presence so overwhelming that even monsters deferred to it. Still others suggest that chaos itself might have played a role, that the very taint that corrupted Caliban somehow nurtured the lost child of the Emperor. But Luther saw something in the feral child's eyes that made him stay his sword when the other knights would have killed what they assumed was a monster. Luther raised the boy as his own. He taught him to speak, to read, to fight. And he watched in awe as the child absorbed knowledge at an impossible rate, mastering skills that took ordinary men decades to learn. The young lion devoured books of tactics and strategy, committing their contents to memory after a single reading. He practiced with weapons until his movements became art, fluid and devastating and utterly precise. He studied the great beasts with an intensity that bordered on obsession, learning their habits and weaknesses, developing strategies to hunt creatures that had terrorized humanity for generations. Luther observed all of this with a mixture of pride and something darker. He had discovered this remarkable being. He had nurtured his potential. He had given him a name and a purpose. In his heart, Luther thought of the lion as his son, his greatest achievement, his gift to Caliban and to humanity. But the student was surpassing the master at a rate that defied comprehension, and Luther found himself increasingly in the lion's shadow rather than beside him. And he watched with something more complicated than awe as Lionel Johnson grew into a warrior who surpassed everyone, including Luther himself. The student had become the master, and though Luther loved the lion as a son and a brother, the seeds of something darker had been planted in the soil of his heart. Together, they led the Order in a campaign that would have been impossible for any previous generation. They unified the knightly orders of Caliban, not always peacefully. They hunted the great beasts to extinction, driving them from their lairs and purging the forests of their taint. They transformed a death world into something approaching civilization. And when the Emperor arrived with his great crusade, when he recognized his lost son and raised Lionel Johnson to command the First Legion of the Adeptus Astartes, it seemed that Caliban's story was reaching its triumphant conclusion. But we are not here to tell the story of the lion. We are here to understand Cypher. And to do that, we must look more closely at one particular position within the Order, a role that predates the Imperium's arrival on Caliban by countless generations, a position known as the Lord Cipher. The Lord Cipher, keeper of secrets and traditions. Every organization that endures across generations develops traditions, rules that govern behavior, customs that connect the present to the past. The Order was no different, but their traditions were forged in the crucible of constant warfare, as tempered by centuries of struggle against the great beasts, refined by the blood of countless knights who had given their lives so that humanity might survive on Caliban. These were not mere formalities or empty rituals. They were the accumulated wisdom of generations, hard-won knowledge about what worked and what did not, what preserved life and what wasted it. Over centuries of warfare against the great beasts, of internal politics and external threats, the Order had accumulated a wealth of traditions that defined what it meant to be one of its members. The rituals of initiation were designed to test not just physical courage, but psychological resilience, weeding out those who might break under the constant pressure of Caliban's deadly environment. The codes of conduct ensured that knights worked together effectively, subordinating personal glory to collective survival. The secrets known only to full members included tactical knowledge about the great beasts, information about safe routes through the forests, and darker lore that most preferred not to discuss. All of these required someone to preserve them, someone to ensure that each new generation learned what the previous generation had known, someone to maintain the connection between past and future, someone whose dedication to this task was absolute, whose commitment was beyond question, whose very identity was subsumed into the role of preservation. This was the role of the Lord Cipher. The position was ancient even by Caliban's standards, dating back to an era when the Order was young and the traditions it guarded were first being formed. But whoever held the title was responsible for more than simple record-keeping. The Lord Cipher was the living memory of the Order, its conscience and its historian rolled into one. He advised the masters on all matters of protocol. He officiated at the most important ceremonies. He ensured that recruits understood the depths of their oaths and that even the highest-ranking members never forgot the foundations upon which their authority rested. But here is where the role becomes truly fascinating, and where we begin to see the seeds of the mystery that would bloom in the millennia to come. The Lord Cipher was required to sacrifice his identity, completely and absolutely, without reservation or remainder. When a knight accepted this position, he was expected to forsake his former name, his former personality, his former relationships, and everything that had made him who he was. The ceremony of investiture was less a promotion than a death and rebirth. The old self destroyed, so that the new role could be embodied without distraction or contamination. From that moment forward, he existed only as the Lord Cipher. His face was hidden beneath a hood at all times, even among those he had once called friends and brothers. His voice was disguised through techniques passed down from previous holders of the title, rendered unrecognizable to any who might have known him before. His movements were shrouded in secrecy, his comings and goings unmarked by witnesses, his presence in any given location a matter of speculation rather than certainty. Other members of the Order were forbidden from recognizing his old self, forbidden from acknowledging that he had ever been anyone other than the embodiment of their traditions. To speak his former name was considered a grave offense. To treat him as one would treat a normal person was nearly as bad. Think about what this means. The Lord Cipher was, by design, unknowable. His identity was not simply hidden, but actively erased, deliberately destroyed, replaced with something that transcended individual personality. He became a symbol rather than a person, a living representation of everything the Order stood for. This was considered not just appropriate but necessary. The Order understood something profound about the nature of institutions and the humans who comprise them. They understood that traditions must be greater than any individual, that the keeper of traditions must therefore be no individual at all. And it was a lofty position, one that the Order took extremely seriously. They knew, as all wise organizations know, that it is the nature of the galaxy to recede and structures to collapse. Without someone dedicated entirely to preservation, without a guardian whose sole purpose was to maintain the integrity of their traditions, even the greatest orders would eventually forget what they once believed and practiced. The Lord Cipher was the bulwark against entropy, the living flame that preserved their culture across the ages. When the Emperor came to Caliban, and Lion L. Johnson was elevated to lead the newly renamed Dark Angels Legion, the role of Lord Cipher was transformed but not eliminated. The traditions of the Order became part of the Legion's heritage, as preserved alongside the martial practices and spiritual beliefs that defined the First Legion. And the Lord Cipher continued to serve, though his responsibilities expanded to encompass the needs of an interstellar military force rather than a planetary knightly order. But rumors swirled around the identity of the Lord Cipher, who served during the years leading up to the Horus Heresy. Two members of the Order, Sar Daviel and Master Remiel, claimed that he was no ordinary knight who had risen through the ranks. They believed he was something far more troubling. They believed he was a survivor of the Knights of Lupus. The Knights of Lupus, a dark origin. If the Order represented the best of Caliban's knightly traditions, the Knights of Lupus represented something far more dangerous. This Order did not hunt the great beasts. They studied them. They sought to understand the creatures that terrorized their world, delving into forbidden knowledge that most sane men would have burned without a second thought. In their libraries were books that spoke of the warp, though they called it by different names. In their practices were rituals that brushed against powers that should never be touched. The Knights of Lupus saw, in the lion's purge of the great beasts, not a triumph but a tragedy. They believed that destroying the monsters meant destroying Caliban's identity, erasing the very purpose for which the knightly orders had been created. More than that, they saw the Lion's campaign to unify the planet as a threat to their way of life, a harbinger of change that would sweep away everything they valued. When Lionel Johnson discovered the true nature of their order, as he showed no mercy, the Knights of Lupus were declared enemies of Caliban and wiped out in a campaign of total annihilation. Total annihilation, that is, with one possible exception. If Daviel and Remiel were correct, then the young knight who assumed the role of Lord Cipher in the years following the Purge was a survivor of this massacre, a man who had hidden his true origins, who had infiltrated the Order under a false name, who had risen through its ranks while concealing the terrible secret of his heritage. The implications of this theory are staggering. It would mean that the keeper of the Order's traditions was secretly a member of an order that had embraced forbidden knowledge, that the guardian of their purity was himself touched by corruption. How this young knight survived the complete annihilation of his order. How he was so quickly made an Astartes when the Space Marines arrived on Caliban. How he rose to so important a position when his origins should have marked him for death. These questions have never been satisfactorily answered. Some believe that his survival speaks to skills of deception that border on the supernatural. Others suggest that he had powerful patrons, perhaps even among the mysterious watchers in the dark who inhabited Caliban's deepest forests. Still others theorize that the lion himself knew the truth, but found the young knight useful enough to overlook his dangerous heritage. Whatever the truth of his origins, the Lord Cipher, who served during the Horus Heresy, was clearly no ordinary space marine. He was one of Luther's closest advisors during the years when the Dark Angel's second-in-command was exiled to Caliban. But he provided counsel on matters that seemed beyond his years, drawing on a depth of esoteric knowledge that had no obvious source. And when the rebellion came, when Luther declared his independence from terror and from the lion, the Lord Cipher was at the heart of events that would shape the Dark Angel's destiny for the next 10 millennia. But the identity of the Lord Cipher during the Horus Heresy may not be the same as the identity of the Cypher who haunts the 41st millennium, because somewhere in the chaos of Caliban's destruction, something changed. The title that had been passed down through generations of the Order became attached to a single figure who seemed to persist across the centuries. A figure who appeared and disappeared according to patterns that no one could discern. And a figure who might be the original Lord Cipher, preserved through some means unknown, or who might be something else entirely. This is where the mystery deepens beyond any hope of simple resolution. Let me tell you about the fall of Caliban and about the birth of the fallen angels. The fall of Caliban, brothers against brothers. The Horus Heresy was a civil war that tore the Imperium apart. Half of the Emperor's sons, the superhuman Primarchs who led his legions, turned traitor under the leadership of Horus Lupercal, the favored son who had been corrupted by the powers of chaos during a moment of weakness and doubt. The galaxy burned as Space Marine fought Space Marine, as brothers who had conquered the stars together turned their weapons upon one another. Battles raged across thousands of worlds, from the glittering spires of civilized hive cities to the desolate wastes of frontier outposts. The very foundations of everything the Emperor had built crumbled to dust beneath the weight of this betrayal. The scale of the destruction is almost impossible to comprehend. Entire sectors were rendered lifeless, their populations exterminated by weapons designed for use against alien civilizations now turned against humanity itself. Legions that had numbered in the tens of thousands were reduced to shattered remnants, their traditions and histories erased by the fury of the conflict. The Emperor himself was mortally wounded in the final confrontation with Horus, preserved only through the desperate measures of the Golden Throne that has sustained his shattered body ever since. Lionel Johnson and his Dark Angels remained loyal to terror throughout this nightmare, but their loyalty would cost them dearly in ways that no one anticipated. While the heresy raged, the Dark Angels were scattered across the galaxy. The Lion led the bulk of his legion in campaigns against the Night Lords and other traitor forces, while a significant portion of his warriors remained on Caliban under Luther's command. The official reason for this garrison was to train new recruits and defend the Legion's homeworld. But there was a deeper truth that the Lion did not share with his subordinates. He had seen something in Luther during the Great Crusade, a moment of hesitation during an assassination attempt that had nearly claimed the Lion's life. He had sent Luther back to Caliban, not as a reward but as a punishment, and a banishment that Luther and his warriors understood all too clearly. 50 years Luther waited on Caliban while his brothers fought and died across the stars. 50 years he watched the Great Crusade continue without him, denied the glory and purpose that were supposed to define a Space Marine's existence. 50 years he had to contemplate the perceived betrayal of the Primarch he had raised from a wild child to the master of a legion. And in those 50 years, something broke inside Luther's soul. The weight was not idle. Luther threw himself into his duties with a fervor that masked the growing emptiness within. He trained new recruits by the thousands, building the garrison on Caliban into a formidable force. He managed the logistics of recruiting and equipping Dark Angels, ensuring that the Legion's supply of fresh warriors never faltered. He dealt with the noble families of Caliban, who had lost their serfs and lands to Imperial administration, smoothing over resentments that threatened to boil over into open rebellion. By any objective measure, he performed his duties excellently. But excellence was not enough. Not for a warrior who had once stood at the right hand of a Primarch. Not for a man who had discovered the greatest find in Caliban's history and watched his discovery eclipse everything he had ever accomplished. The voices in his head, the whispers that came in the quiet hours of the night, found fertile ground in Luther's wounded pride. The influence of chaos is subtle when it wishes to be. It does not always manifest as demons bursting through reality or warriors mutating into monsters. Sometimes it comes as doubt, as resentment, as the gradual erosion of faith and loyalty, until a man finds himself believing things he would have once found abhorrent. Luther began to study the forbidden texts that remained on Caliban, books that should have been destroyed, but had somehow survived the purges. Books that spoke of the warp and the powers that dwelt within it, that promised knowledge and strength to those brave enough to seek them. He began to believe that Caliban was threatened not by external enemies, but by the Lion's abandonment. He began to think that perhaps independence from the Imperium was not treason, but survival. When word of Horus's rebellion reached Caliban, Luther made his choice. He declared the planet independent from terror, claiming that the Lion had betrayed them by leaving them to rot while the galaxy burned. He was joined by many of the Dark Angels stationed with him, warriors who shared his resentment, who felt abandoned by their Primarch, who saw in Luther's words an articulation of grievances they had long suppressed. Among these rebels were the chapter master Astellan and the librarian Zahariel, both of whom would play significant roles in the tragedy to come. But not all of the Dark Angels on Caliban supported Luther's rebellion. The garrison was divided against itself, brother against brother, friend against friend, in a preview of the greater tragedy that was about to unfold. Some warriors remained loyal to the Lion and the Emperor, refusing to abandon their oaths regardless of how they had been treated. And others embraced Luther's vision of an independent Caliban, seeing in his words an articulation of grievances they had long suppressed, a validation of resentments they had been taught to deny. The political situation grew increasingly unstable, with plots and counterplots swirling through the fortress monastery like poison in an open wound. In the midst of this chaos, the Lord Cipher was killed during a failed coup attempt, and Luther elevated the librarian Zahariel to take his place. This detail is crucial to understanding the mystery of the modern Cypher. If Zahariel became the Lord Cipher shortly before Caliban's destruction, then he is one of the most likely candidates for the figure who has haunted the Dark Angels for 10,000 years. But we will return to that possibility shortly. For now, let us focus on what happened when the lion finally returned home. The Horus Heresy ended with the Emperor victorious but mortally wounded, interred within the Golden Throne to sustain his shattered body and keep the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon burning. The lion, racked with grief over his father's fate, led his fleet back to Caliban, expecting to find rest and reinforcement. What he found instead was treachery. When the Dark Angels' ships entered orbit, they were met by a devastating barrage of defensive fire from the planet's surface. Someone had activated Caliban's orbital defense systems and turned them against the returning legion. The lion was stunned. He pulled his fleet back and attempted to communicate with the surface, to understand what was happening. The answer came from a merchant ship fleeing the system. Thus Luther had poisoned the minds of those left behind. Luther had declared himself independent. Luther had turned half of the Dark Angels against their Primarch. The lion's response was as brutal as it was understandable. He ordered a systematic bombardment of the planet, targeting every concentration of rebel forces with the devastating firepower of his fleet. Where orbital strikes were not sufficient, Dark Angels descended to the surface to cleanse their traitorous brothers in person. The fighting was savage beyond description. Space Marine against Space Marine, brother against brother. The rebels fought with the desperation of men who knew they had crossed a line from which there was no return. At the heart of the conflict, in the fortress monastery where the Order had once been headquartered, the lion confronted Luther himself. On what followed was a duel that would become the stuff of legend, a battle between two of the greatest warriors Caliban had ever produced. Luther had been elevated to strength equal to the lion by the Chaos Gods, his mortal frame enhanced by infernal powers, until he could match his former student blow for blow. The monastery crumbled around them as they fought, their weapons tearing apart walls and floors with each exchange. But in the end, the lion proved the greater warrior. He struck Luther down, mortally wounding the man who had raised him. And in that moment, as Luther lay broken at his feet, something changed. Luther looked up at the lion with eyes suddenly clear of chaos's influence, eyes filled with horrified recognition of what he had done. He began to weep, his will to fight utterly broken by the realization of his betrayal. And then the Chaos Gods intervened. Realizing that their champion had failed, that the rebellion they had nurtured had collapsed at the crucial moment, the powers of the warp unleashed their fury upon Caliban. Perhaps it was punishment for Luther's failure. Perhaps it was an attempt to salvage something from the defeat. Perhaps it was simply the cruel humor of entities that view mortal suffering as entertainment. Whatever the motivation, the result was catastrophic. A warp storm of unprecedented ferocity descended upon the planet, its energies tearing the world apart, even as the lion's bombardment continued from above. Reality fractured in ways that defied physical laws, with spaces folding into themselves and time running backwards or standing still. The screaming of the damned could be heard across dimensions. It is a chorus of agony that drove unprotected minds to madness. Space and time lost meaning as the material and immaterial collapsed into one another. When the storm finally subsided, Caliban was gone, destroyed, reduced to a field of debris orbiting a wound in space where a world had once existed. A planet that had supported human life for millennia had been wiped from existence in moments, its destruction so complete that even the warp seemed to recoil from the devastation. Only one fragment of the planet survived, defying all logic and expectation. The fortress monastery of the Order, protected by ancient void shields and perhaps by other, less explicable forces, remained intact amid the cosmic wreckage. This asteroid would become known as the Rock, and it would serve as the mobile fortress monastery of the Dark Angels chapter for the next 10 millennia, a fragment of a dead world carrying secrets that could never be revealed. But what of Luther? What of his followers? What of the Dark Angels who had sided with him against their Primarch? When the Dark Angels descended to the fortress monastery after the storm had passed, they found Luther. He was broken in ways that went beyond physical injury, his mind shattered by the weight of what he had done and what he had witnessed. He was broken, mumbling incoherently about forgiveness and the lion's return. He claimed that the lion had been taken by the Watchers in the dark, that he would come back one day to absolve the sins of those who had betrayed him. The Dark Angels imprisoned Luther deep within the rock, where he remains to this day, a raving prophet whose prophecies grow more troubling with each passing century. Of the lion, there was no sign. His body was never found. His fate remained unknown to all save the Watchers in the dark and the Emperor himself.
Now, I have to be honest with you all for a moment. Out of every character I've covered on this channel, Cypher is the one that keeps me up at night. And I mean that genuinely. There's something about a mystery that refuses to be solved that just hooks into your brain, you know? Personally, I lean toward believing he's working towards something good, something the Dark Angels are too blinded by shame to understand. Maybe that's just me being optimistic in a setting that doesn't really reward optimism. But the fact that he turned away at the throne room when he was told not yet, that detail gets me every time. A villain doesn't stop, a villain pushes through. Cypher stopped. Whatever he is, whoever he turns out to be, I think Games Workshop has created something genuinely special. But anyways, that's just my opinion, and back to the lore.
10,000 years would pass before the truth was revealed, before the Primarch finally awakened from his healing slumber to find a galaxy far darker than the one he had left behind. But we are concerned with a different mystery. We are concerned with what happened to the other rebels, to the Dark Angels who had followed Luther into damnation, because they were not destroyed with Caliban. They were not killed in the fighting or consumed by the warp storm. Instead, they were scattered. The Chaos Gods, in their spite, threw Luther's followers through the warp. They were cast across time and space, appearing at random throughout the galaxy in different eras and different locations. Some emerged in the distant past. Some appeared in what was then the present. Some would not emerge for millennia yet to come. These are the fallen angels, the secret shame of the Dark Angels chapter, the heresy that the First Legion has spent 10,000 years trying to hide. And among the fallen, there was one who stood apart. One who was different from all the others, one whose legend would grow until it eclipsed even the memory of Luther himself. Cypher. The many faces of Cypher, identity and theories. Who is Cypher? It is a question that has consumed the inner circle of the Dark Angels for centuries, a question that has driven interrogator chaplains to obsession and supreme grand masters to despair. A question that may not have an answer, or that may have too many answers for any single truth to emerge. Let us consider the possibilities. The first and perhaps most obvious candidate is Zahariel El-Zurias, the librarian who was elevated to the position of Lord Cipher by Luther shortly before Caliban's destruction. Zahariel's history is a complicated one. He was born on Caliban in the era before the Emperor's arrival, a young knight who showed remarkable psychic potential. He rose through the ranks of the Order and later the Dark Angels, becoming one of the Legion's most powerful librarians before the Edict of Nicaea forced him to suppress his abilities. When Luther declared his rebellion, Zahariel was initially resistant. He did not share Luther's resentment of the Lion, and he struggled with the implications of secession from the Imperium. But the more he learned of Caliban's dark past, the more he discovered about the warp taint that had corrupted his homeworld for millennia, the more he began to sympathize with Luther's position. Eventually, Zahariel became one of the fallen angels, though his allegiance remained complex. He was not aligned with Horus or the other traitor legions. He was not a servant of any specific chaos god. He was simply a man who had been forced to choose between terrible options and had chosen what he believed was the lesser evil. Zahariel's candidacy as the modern Cypher is supported by several pieces of evidence. During his most recent capture by the Dark Angels, Cypher spoke a code word that should have been known only to a handful of people from the Heresy era. The word was Starfire, the code word that had been used to activate Caliban's orbital defense weapons against the Lion's fleet. Only 4 people had known that code: Luther, Astalon, Griffane, and Zahariel. If Cypher knows this word, he must be one of these 4, or he must have learned it from someone who was. Furthermore, Zahariel was a powerful psyker before the Edict of Nicaea, and the modern Cypher displays abilities that seem to border on the supernatural. His uncanny knack for escaping impossible situations, his apparent foreknowledge of events, his ability to manipulate circumstances to his advantage, all of these could be explained by psychic powers wielded subtly and carefully. But there are problems with the Zahariel theory. In the Horus Heresy novels, Zahariel is portrayed as an ally of the Watchers in the Dark, working alongside them against the forces of chaos. Yet the original Lord Cipher, the one who held the position before Zahariel, seemed to have a very different relationship with these mysterious beings. If Zahariel is the modern Cipher, his behavior and allegiances have changed dramatically since the Heresy era. The second major theory holds that Cipher is exactly who he claims to be in his title, the Lord Cipher, not any specific individual, but a role that has been passed down through the ages. We know that the position of Lord Cipher was designed to erase individual identity. We know that multiple people held the title even before the destruction of Caliban. Is it possible that the Cipher who appears throughout the 41st millennium is not one person, but many? Or that the title and the mantle have been inherited by successive bearers, each one assuming the identity and equipment of their predecessor? This theory would explain some of the contradictions in Cipher's behavior. It would explain how he can appear in multiple locations at roughly the same time, or how his actions can seem to serve contradictory purposes. If there are multiple Cyphers, operating independently but sharing a common identity, then the confusion surrounding this figure becomes much more understandable. But there are problems with this theory as well. The fallen angels were scattered through time and space after Caliban's destruction. They are a finite population, most of whom have been captured or killed by the Dark Angels over the past 10 millennia. If the role of Cipher was being passed down among them, well, we would expect to see some evidence of this succession in the form of captured fallen who had once held the title. Instead, the Dark Angels have never captured anyone who claimed to be a former Cipher, nor have they found any evidence that the title has been transferred since the heresy. The third and strangest theory is that Cipher is somehow outside normal time. The warp does not respect the laws of physics that govern the material universe. Time flows differently in that hellish dimension, and those who travel through it can emerge before they entered or centuries after they left. We know that the fallen were scattered through time as well as space. Is it possible that Cipher's appearances throughout history are not the work of an immortal or a succession of bearers, but of a single individual bouncing through time like a stone skipping across a pond? This theory would explain how Cipher has survived for 10,000 years without obviously aging. It would explain his apparent ability to know things before they happen. It would even explain some of the stranger incidents in his recorded history, moments when he seemed to be in 2 places at once, or when he appeared to remember events that had not yet occurred. But it raises as many questions as it answers, particularly regarding who is guiding his jumps through time and toward what ultimate purpose. There is one more possibility that we must consider, though it veers into speculation that even the most open-minded scholars of the Dark Angels would find troubling. What if Cipher is not any of the individuals we have mentioned? What if he is something else entirely, something that has adopted the mantle of Lord Cipher for its own unfathomable reasons? Some members of the Inner Circle have theorized that Cipher might be an emissary sent by the Emperor himself. This theory is supported by several of Cipher's own statements, including a cryptic message he once sent to Supreme Grand Master Azrael. It would explain why Cipher has never fully committed to any faction, why he has aided both the forces of order and the forces of chaos at various points in history, only why he has always seemed to be working towards some goal that transcends the petty concerns of the factions he temporarily allies with. But if Cypher is the Emperor's agent, what is his mission, and why would the Emperor choose to work through a figure so closely associated with the Dark Angel's greatest shame? I do not know the answer. No one does. That is what makes Cypher the most mysterious character in Warhammer 40,000. His identity is not simply unknown, it is unknowable. Every theory collapses under scrutiny. Every explanation raises new questions. He exists in a state of perpetual ambiguity, a living cipher whose name has become literally accurate. All we can do is examine the evidence and marvel at the mystery. Let us turn now to what we know with certainty about Cypher: his appearance, his weapons, and the strange sword he carries but never draws. The gunslinger, weapons and appearance. Whatever his true identity, whatever his ultimate purpose, one thing about Cypher is unmistakable. He is a warrior of terrifying skill, a gunslinger whose speed and accuracy with paired pistols has become legendary across the galaxy. In an age of bolt weapons and chain swords, of plasma cannons and power fists, Cypher fights with a simplicity that borders on elegant. One bolt pistol in one hand, one plasma pistol in the other, and skill enough to make these basic weapons more deadly than the most exotic arsenal. To watch Cypher fight is to witness a master craftsman at work. Every movement is economical, precise, flowing from one action to the next with the grace of a dancer and the deadliness of an apex predator. He does not waste ammunition. He does not spray fire and hope for hits. Every shot is placed exactly where it needs to be, finding gaps in armor, striking vital points, neutralizing threats with a minimum of expenditure. In a galaxy where the preferred solution to most problems is overwhelming firepower, Cypher achieves the same results with nothing more than 2 pistols and the accumulated skill of 10,000 years. His equipment is ancient, dating back to the Horus Heresy at the very least, and possibly to a time before that. The bolt pistol is of a pattern not seen in modern Imperial manufacture, its lines cleaner and its mechanisms more refined than the weapons produced by the Adeptus Mechanicus in the current era. Some scholars believe it may be archaeotech, as a relic from the dark age of technology, when humanity's mastery of science and engineering reached heights that have never been reclaimed. Others suggest it is simply a masterwork from the Great Crusade era, maintained and repaired across the millennia, with a care that speaks to its owner's deep attachment. Whatever its origins, the weapon performs with a reliability and precision that modern bolt pistols cannot match. The plasma pistol is equally remarkable, perhaps more so given the notoriously temperamental nature of plasma weapons. It fires with precision that should be impossible, its shots finding their targets with almost supernatural accuracy. Plasma weapons are notoriously difficult to control. They generate tremendous heat. They can overload and explode. They require constant maintenance and expert handling. Yet Cypher wields his as casually as a normal man might wield a stick. He fires it in the midst of melee combat, threading shots between battling warriors to strike enemies at ranges that should be impossible for a weapon designed for close quarters engagement. Together, these weapons have made Cypher one of the deadliest individual combatants in the galaxy. He can fire both pistols simultaneously while moving at full speed, striking targets with every shot, no matter how chaotic the battlefield around him. He has been observed taking down multiple enemies with a single magazine, conserving ammunition with a precision that speaks to centuries of practice. Even the elite warriors of the Deathwing and Ravenwing, the Dark Angel's most skilled hunters, have learned to fear engaging him in a firefight. But the pistols are not what makes Cypher truly distinctive. Many Space Marines carry paired weapons. Many warriors have honed their marksmanship to remarkable levels. The galaxy is vast and ancient, and skill with firearms is hardly unique among its inhabitants. What sets Cypher apart? What makes him instantly recognizable across the galaxy? What causes servants of both the Emperor and the Dark Gods to whisper his name with equal measures of fascination and dread is his appearance. He wears power armor of an ancient pattern, the green ceramite dulled by age and conflict, bearing the scars of 10,000 years of warfare. This is not the gleaming plate of a parade ground warrior, but the functional equipment of someone who has lived his entire existence in combat, who has repaired and modified his armor countless times, who has replaced damaged components with whatever was available. The effect is not shabby, but rather intensely practical. The armor of a pragmatist who values function over appearance. Over this armor, he wears robes of bone white, a hooded cloak that conceals his face and marks him as something other than an ordinary space marine. The white of these robes is striking against the dark green of his armor, impossible to miss, impossible to ignore. In the 41st millennium, where subtlety is often the difference between survival and death, Cypher's distinctive appearance seems almost suicidal. Any enemy who knows of him can recognize him instantly. Any dark angel who spots him will know immediately who they face. This combination of green armor and white robes is deliberately evocative, rich with symbolism that any student of Dark Angel's history would immediately recognize. It recalls the original colors of the Dark Angel's Legion before the heresy, the green and white that marked them as the First Legion, before their shame drove them to adopt the somber black of mourning. By wearing these colors, Cipher announces his heritage to everyone who sees him. He is a Dark Angel. He is one of the fallen. He is the living embodiment of the chapter's darkest secret, walking openly through a galaxy that would destroy him if it understood what he represented. Some have suggested that this appearance is deliberate provocation, that Cipher chooses to dress this way precisely because it draws attention, precisely because it forces the Dark Angels to respond to his presence. If he wanted to move undetected through the Imperium, he could easily adopt a more anonymous guise. Power armor can be repainted, robes can be discarded, yet Cipher clings to his distinctive appearance century after century, as if he wants to be recognized, as if drawing the Dark Angel's pursuit is itself part of his plan. His face is rarely seen. The hood of his cloak casts deep shadows, concealing his features from all but the closest observers. Those who have caught glimpses report a face that seems ordinary enough, the face of a space marine like any other. But there is something in his eyes, they say. Something cold and calculating. Something that suggests depths of knowledge and purpose that no simple warrior should possess. Meeting Cipher's gaze is described as an unsettling experience, like looking into a well that descends far deeper than should be possible. But we have not yet discussed the most distinctive aspect of Cipher's appearance. We have not yet spoken of the sword that is never drawn across his back. Cipher carries a sword, not a power sword or a chain sword or any of the other exotic melee weapons favored by space marines in the 41st millennium. A simple blade, elegant in its design, ornate in its decoration. Its pommel wrapped in crimson and gold that speaks of ancient craftsmanship and forgotten techniques. The sword hangs there constantly, a silent presence that dominates every encounter with its bearer. It is visible to everyone who meets Cipher, impossible to overlook, and yet he has never been observed using it in combat. Not once in 10,000 years of recorded sightings. Not in any battle, was regardless of how desperate the circumstances or how close he came to death. The sword is always there, always visible, always sheathed. This detail alone would be unusual enough to warrant attention. Space Marines are practical warriors who use every weapon at their disposal. A sword is not an ornament, but a tool meant to be drawn and wielded when circumstances demand. To carry a blade for millennia without ever using it defies every instinct that the Adeptus Astartes possess. It suggests that the sword is not simply a weapon, but something else entirely. Something whose purpose goes beyond mere combat. What is this weapon? Why does Cipher carry a blade he never uses? The questions have spawned theories as numerous as the stars, and some of those theories would shake the Dark Angels to their foundations if they were proven true. But the mystery of the sword is inseparable from the mystery of Cipher himself, another layer of enigma wrapped around an already incomprehensible figure. The most persistent theory is that the sword is the Lion's Sword, the personal weapon of Primarch Lion L. Johnson himself. This blade was a gift from the Emperor to his son, forged in the workshops of terror, using techniques that have been lost to time, imbued with significance that transcended its function as a weapon. The Lion carried this sword throughout the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, using it to strike down enemies that ranged from alien warlords to demon princes. It was as much a symbol of his authority as a tool of war, recognized across the Imperium as the weapon of the First Legion's master. After the destruction of Caliban, both the Lion and his sword vanished, but no one knew what had become of them. If Cypher carries the Lion sword, it would be one of the most significant relics in all of Dark Angel's history. But why would Cypher have the Lion's weapon? Some believe that he took it from the Primarch's body after the battle with Luther, claiming it as a trophy or preserving it for some future purpose. Others suggest that the sword was somehow separated from the Lion during the chaos of Caliban's destruction and eventually found its way into Cypher's hands through means unknown. Still others theorize that Cypher was specifically entrusted with the blade, perhaps by the Watchers in the Dark, perhaps by the Lion himself in some moment lost to history. The theory takes on even greater significance when combined with the belief that Cypher is slowly making his way toward terror. If he carries the Lion sword, and if he intends to reach the throne room of the Emperor, then his purpose might be nothing less than the redemption of the Dark Angels themselves. By presenting the broken sword of a loyal Primarch before the Emperor, Cypher might be seeking absolution for the sins of the fallen. He might be attempting to heal the rift that has divided the First Legion for 10,000 years. This interpretation casts Cypher in a surprisingly sympathetic light. It suggests that despite his association with the traitors of Caliban, despite his status as the most hunted of the fallen, he has remained loyal to the Emperor in his own fashion. He is not a villain in this reading, but a tragic hero, a penitent seeking forgiveness through an act of supreme devotion. But there is a darker interpretation of the sword's significance, as some believe that Cypher does not carry the Lion sword at all, but the blade of Luther, a weapon associated with the arch-traitor who led the rebellion on Caliban. In this reading, Cypher's journey to terror is not a pilgrimage of redemption, but an assassination attempt. He seeks to reach the Emperor, not to present a holy relic, but to drive a corrupted blade into the heart of the Imperium's god. This theory explains why Cypher never draws the sword. If the blade is tainted by chaos, if it carries Luther's corruption within its steel, then using it would be dangerous to anyone nearby, perhaps even to Cypher himself. He carries it sheathed because he cannot safely wield it, because its power can only be unleashed once, at the moment when it finds its ultimate target. There is evidence for both theories, and evidence against both as well. When the interrogator chaplain Asmodai once touched the sword's crimson and gold pommel, he experienced a vision of being stabbed, of tumbling with a snarling foe. Was this a psychic echo of the Lion's final battle with Luther, or a premonition of what the sword would one day do to someone else? The matter was further complicated during the Gathering Storm, when Cypher accompanied the resurrected Primarch Reboot Gilliman to Terra. Gilliman is one of the few beings in the galaxy who would have recognized the Lion sword on sight. He grew up alongside his brothers, fought beside them, knew their weapons as well as his own. And when Gilliman saw the blade on Cypher's back, his reaction was striking. He shuddered with what witnesses described as dread, and he immediately ordered Cypher's arrest, rather than allow the fallen to enter the presence of the Emperor. Why would Gilliman react this way? If the sword were simply the Lion's personal weapon, preserved across the millennia, surely he would have been moved by its presence rather than horrified. His reaction suggests that he saw something in the blade that disturbed him deeply, something that made him unwilling to allow it anywhere near his father's comatose form. We do not know what Gilliman saw. We do not know whether the sword is holy or corrupted, whether Cypher is savior or destroyer. The mystery persists, and it may persist forever. All we know for certain is that the blade exists, that Cypher has carried it for 10,000 years, and that he has never drawn it for any reason whatsoever. As perhaps the sword cannot be drawn until the moment is right. Perhaps it is waiting for something that has not yet come to pass. Perhaps Cypher himself does not know what will happen when steel finally clears scabbard after 10 millennia of patient waiting. The galaxy holds its breath and wonders. Sightings. Throughout history, the trail of mystery. Since the destruction of Caliban, Cypher has been sighted in countless sectors across every segmentum of the Imperium. His appearances follow no discernible pattern that the greatest strategic minds have been able to identify. He emerges without warning, acts in ways that defy easy interpretation, and vanishes before anyone can apprehend him. The Dark Angels have compiled extensive records of these sightings, and archives that stretch back millennia and fill entire data vaults with speculation and frustration. Generations of interrogator chaplains have devoted their lives to studying these records, searching for the pattern that must exist, the logic that must underlie such consistent behavior across such vast spans of time. They have found nothing but more questions. The earliest confirmed sighting occurred during the Forgotten Wars, a series of conflicts so ancient that their details have been largely lost to history. The records from this era are fragmentary at best, corrupted by time and the interference of forces that did not want these events remembered. What survives suggests that Cypher was already recognized as a significant threat by this point, already associated with the Fallen. He is already pursuing purposes that the Dark Angels could not comprehend. Even then, Cypher was recognized as an enemy of the Dark Angels, a figure of particular menace whose presence demanded immediate response. What he did during these wars, what goals he pursued, remains unknown. But the pattern was established from the very beginning. Cypher would appear, the Dark Angels would mobilize to capture him, and somehow he would escape their grasp. In the centuries that followed, the sightings multiplied across the galaxy. Cypher was observed on worlds throughout the Imperium, from the gleaming spires of civilized hive cities to the savage frontier worlds on the edge of human space. His presence was invariably associated with conflict and upheaval, though the nature of that upheaval varied wildly from one appearance to the next. Where he appeared, things went wrong. Rebellions erupted, governments fell, carefully laid plans collapsed into chaos. The Dark Angels learned to treat any rumor of his presence as an emergency requiring immediate attention, abandoning other missions and diverting entire companies to pursue this single figure. But here is where the mystery deepens. Not all of the changes Cypher precipitated were harmful to the Imperium. In some cases, his interventions seemed designed to strengthen Imperial positions rather than weaken them. Systems that he appeared to destabilize often emerged from the turmoil in better shape than before, their populations more unified, their defenses more robust. There is recorded evidence of a conversation between Cypher and Abaddon the Despoiler, and in which the War Master of Chaos noted with apparent annoyance that the systems Cypher attacked were consistently in better shape afterward than they had been before. What does this mean? Is Cypher working against the Imperium through subtle subversion, or is he strengthening it through seemingly destructive methods? Does he serve chaos or oppose it? Is he a traitor or a peculiarly effective loyalist? The questions multiply with every recorded incident. During one conflict, Cypher assassinated a planetary governor who was secretly a chaos cultist. During another, he armed rebels who later turned out to be fighting against a corrupt ecclesiarchy regime. During still another, he led the Dark Angels on a chase that, seemingly by coincidence, positioned them perfectly to intercept a major chaos incursion. Time and time again, his actions produced outcomes that benefited the Imperium even when his methods appeared treasonous. There is a theory among certain members of the Inner Circle that this is deliberate, that Cypher, despite his status as a fallen angel, remains loyal to the Emperor in some fundamental way, that his apparent treasons are actually elaborate operations designed to achieve goals that could not be accomplished through orthodox means. In this reading, Cypher is something like a deep-cover operative, an agent provocateur whose true allegiance is hidden even from his apparent allies. But this theory does not explain all of his actions. There are incidents where Cipher has genuinely harmed the Imperium, where his interventions have cost lives and territory that served no discernible purpose. There are battles where he has fought alongside Chaos Space Marines against loyal forces. There are moments where his behavior seems impossible to reconcile with any form of loyalty. Perhaps this is the point. Perhaps Cypher's true purpose transcends such simple categories as loyal and traitor, friend and enemy. Perhaps he is working towards something that requires both construction and destruction, that demands he play every side against the middle. Or perhaps there truly is no pattern, no grand design, only a being who acts according to whims that no mortal mind can comprehend. One thing seems certain. Cypher's movements over the millennia have brought him progressively closer to terror. His sightings have not been random. They trace a slow, spiraling path through the galaxy that seems to be converging on the throne world of the Imperium. But whatever his ultimate purpose, whatever the sword he carries is intended to accomplish, it will apparently require him to reach holy terror itself. The Dark Angels have noticed this pattern. It fills them with dread. The Watchers in the dark. Mysterious allies. Any discussion of Cipher must eventually address the Watchers in the dark, those enigmatic beings who have been intertwined with the Dark Angels' history since before the Imperium existed. Understanding the Watchers is as difficult as understanding Cipher himself, for they are perhaps the only creatures in the galaxy who are even more secretive than the Lord of the Fallen. Their origins are lost in the mists of Caliban's ancient past. Their motives remain as inscrutable as the depths of the warp, and their connection to Cipher adds yet another layer of mystery to an already incomprehensible figure. The Watchers in the Dark are small, hooded figures that have been associated with the Dark Angels chapter since its founding. They stand perhaps half the height of a normal human, their bodies completely concealed beneath voluminous robes that seem to absorb light rather than reflect it. No one has ever seen what lies beneath those robes, and those who have tried to discover the truth have a tendency to disappear without explanation. They do not speak, at least not in any way that normal beings can perceive, yet they communicate somehow, conveying meaning through presence and action rather than words. They appear to be native to Caliban, and having inhabited the planet's deepest forests since long before humanity arrived during the Dark Age of technology. The colonists who settled Caliban knew of them, spoke of them in whispered legends, treated them with a mixture of fear and reverence that persisted across generations. The Knights of the Order encountered them during their quests against the great beasts, sometimes receiving aid that saved their lives, sometimes facing obstacles that seemed designed to test their worthiness. The relationship between humanity and the Watchers was never one of equals, never truly an alliance, but neither was it hostile. They coexisted, each pursuing purposes that the other could not fully comprehend. Their true nature is unknown, the subject of endless speculation among those few individuals who are aware of their existence. Some believe they are Xenos, an alien species that somehow allied itself with the First Legion. Others think they are warp constructs, beings of psychic energy that have taken physical form. Still others speculate that they are something older and stranger, entities from outside normal reality who have taken an interest in the affairs of the Dark Angels for their own unfathomable reasons. What we know for certain is limited. The Watchers exist outside normal time and space in some fashion that defies conventional understanding. They can perceive the flow of events as a three-dimensional mosaic rather than a linear progression, viewing past and future simultaneously. They are implacably opposed to chaos, having dedicated themselves to fighting the ruinous powers long before the Dark Angels even existed. And they have maintained a relationship with the First Legion that seems to transcend simple alliance. The Watchers in the Dark were present on Caliban before the Emperor arrived. They watched the young Lion L. Johnson during his years alone in the forest, and some believe they played a role in his survival. They were present during the destruction of Caliban, protecting certain locations and certain individuals through means unknown. They survived the planet's annihilation and now inhabit the rock, serving the Dark Angels in their own mysterious fashion. Most importantly for our purposes, the Watchers have a connection to Cypher that goes beyond anything they share with other members of the Fallen. When Cypher visited the rock in the 41st Millennium, the Watchers' behavior changed. They became more active, more visible, and more willing to intervene in events. Some observers believe that the Watchers have been protecting Cypher throughout the millennia, that his uncanny ability to escape capture is at least partially their doing. This connection was demonstrated most dramatically during the events surrounding the Tuchulcha engine. Cypher voluntarily surrendered himself to the Dark Angels and revealed the existence of an ancient device hidden within the rock, a machine capable of manipulating time and space when combined with two other artifacts. He claimed that a faction of Fallen were cooperating with Typhus of the Death Guard to use these devices for their own purposes, and that he needed the Dark Angels' help to stop them. The Supreme Grand Master Azrael was understandably skeptical. Cypher had been the chapter's most hunted enemy for millennia. The idea that he would simply walk into their hands and offer to help them defied belief. But then something remarkable happened. The Watchers in the dark sided with Cypher. They indicated through their actions and their silence that his words should be trusted, that his mission was one they supported. With the Watcher's endorsement, Azrael agreed to work with Cypher. The three devices were brought together over the ruins of Caliban, and a portal through time was opened. But before the portal could be used, Azrael made a different choice. Convinced by his chief librarian Ezekiel that rewriting history would be catastrophic, the Supreme Grand Master ordered the Tuchulcha to scatter everyone near the rift through time and space. The unintended consequence of this decision was staggering. Yet the warp storm that had scattered the Fallen after Caliban's destruction was not caused by the Chaos God's spite, as had always been believed. It was caused by Azrael's order 10,000 years in the future, creating a causal loop of impossible complexity. The Fallen were scattered because of an action taken millennia after the scattering itself. What was Cypher's role in all of this? Was he trying to change history or preserve it? Did he know about the causal loop? And if so, was he trying to break it or ensure its continuation? The questions multiply endlessly, and the answers remain as elusive as the Lord of the Fallen himself. The Gathering Storm, Cypher and Gilliman. The events of the Gathering Storm campaign brought Cypher closer to his apparent goal than he had ever been before: the fall of Cadia. The long-standing fortress world that had held the forces of chaos at bay for millennia sent shockwaves through the Imperium. The opening of the Great Rift, a wound in reality that split the galaxy in two, threatened the very existence of human civilization. The resurrection of Robute Gilliman, the first loyalist Primarch to return in 10,000 years, offered hope that few had dared to imagine. All of these galaxy-shaking events created an opportunity that Cypher was apparently waiting for. Threads of fate that had been woven across millennia came together in ways that suggested planning beyond mortal comprehension. And when that opportunity arose, when the pieces aligned in the precise configuration required, Cypher seized it with both hands. It began in the depths of a Blackstone fortress controlled by the Red Corsairs, by a notorious Chaos warband that had carved an empire from the lawless regions of the galaxy. This ancient structure, one of the mysterious alien artifacts that drifted through the stars, had become a stronghold for the renegades and their captives. Among those captives was the recently resurrected Primarch Robute Gilliman and his allies, heroes of the Imperium, who had been captured during their desperate journey toward Terra. The Lord Commander of the Imperium, the son of the Emperor, returned to life after 10,000 years of stasis, was a prisoner of chaos. The irony was not lost on anyone. Gilliman had been awakened specifically to lead humanity through its darkest hour, to restore order to an Imperium that had decayed into stagnation and despair. Yet before he could even reach Terra, Before he could assume the mantle of leadership that awaited him, he had been captured by the very forces he was meant to defeat. And then Cypher appeared. Working alongside the Harlequin Shadowseer Salandri Veilwalker, that enigmatic performer who served purposes as obscure as Cypher's own, the Lord of the Fallen infiltrated the Blackstone Fortress with a band of his fallen allies. They fought their way through Red Corsairs and demons alike, reaching the cells where Gilliman and his companions were held. When Cypher offered to help them escape, Gilliman was understandably wary. He knew nothing of Cypher's identity or history, but he recognized danger when he saw it. Nevertheless, the Primarch agreed. He had little choice. What followed was a journey through the webway, from the ancient network of passages that the Aeldari used to travel across the galaxy without entering the warp. Cypher guided the rescued Imperials through this alien realm, leading them toward Terra through paths that no human had ever walked before. Along the way, they were joined by more of Cypher's fallen allies, warriors who emerged from the shadows to fight alongside the Primarch's entourage. The climax of the journey came on Luna, where the forces of the Thousand Suns under Magnus the Red had staged an invasion of the solar system itself. Cypher fought alongside Gilliman in this battle, his pistols speaking death to the servants of Sinch. Whatever his ultimate purpose, whatever dark designs he might harbor, in that moment, he was an ally of the Imperium. He helped save the Primarch. He helped defend the birthworld of humanity. And then they reached Terra. At the gates of the Imperial Palace, Gilliman made a decision that has been debated by strategists and historians ever since. Despite everything Cypher had done to help him, despite the aid the Fallen had provided throughout the journey, the Primarch ordered the Adeptus Custodes to arrest Cypher and his companions. The Lord of the Fallen snarled with apparent anger and briefly reached for his weapons, but then he and his allies surrendered without a fight. Why did Gilliman betray his ally? The answer may lie in what the Primarch saw when he looked at Cypher's sword. Gilliman would have recognized the lion's sword if that is indeed what Cypher carries. He would have known its significance, known what it might represent. And he would have understood the danger of allowing such a weapon anywhere near his father's comatose form. Cypher was imprisoned in the dark cells beneath the Imperial Palace, the most secure prison in the entire Imperium. These cells contain horrors from the Age of Strife and beyond, entities so dangerous that they cannot be killed and must instead be contained for eternity. The Shadow Keepers, an order of Adeptus Custodes dedicated to guarding these prisoners, took custody of the Lord of the Fallen. Everyone assumed the story was over. Cypher had reached Terra, but he had failed. He would spend eternity in a prison from which no one had ever escaped. Everyone was wrong. Escape from the dark cells, the prison, no one escapes. The dark cells are a place of absolute security, and designed by the Emperor himself, in an age when his knowledge encompassed mysteries that modern humanity can barely comprehend. 81 levels of containment facilities, each one more secure than the last, descending into the bedrock beneath the Imperial Palace, like the rings of some technological hell. Rune locks and wards and sanctic circles protect every corridor, their protections layered so that the failure of any single system would not compromise the whole. 100 custodians patrol the halls at all times, each one among the finest warriors humanity has ever produced, each one sworn to prevent escape regardless of the cost. Neither light nor sound can escape from the cells themselves. The prisoners within are not simply imprisoned, but isolated from reality in ways that would drive normal minds to madness, as some of the entities held in the dark cells are so dangerous that even allowing them to perceive the outside world could trigger catastrophe. Others are so ancient that their memories alone could corrupt anyone exposed to them. Still others exist partially outside normal reality, their imprisonment requiring constant vigilance and the continuous application of techniques that few beings in the galaxy understand. The Shadow Keepers, an order of Adeptus Custodes dedicated specifically to maintaining the dark cells, take their duties with deadly seriousness. They train for centuries before being trusted with the responsibilities of this posting. They undergo psychological conditioning that makes them immune to the manipulations of their charges. Yet they are equipped with specialized weapons and armor designed to counter threats that most warriors will never face. To be imprisoned in the dark cells is to be removed from existence itself, held in a state of containment that approaches oblivion. No one has ever escaped from the dark cells. The statement was not hyperbole, but simple fact, verified across millennia of operation, confirmed by records that stretched back to the very founding of the Imperium. In all the ages since the Emperor himself designed their containment protocols, in all the countless centuries since the first prisoners were committed to their depths, not a single prisoner had ever broken free. The entities held within those cells had tried, of course. Some of them had tried repeatedly, bringing to bear powers and knowledge that defied mortal understanding. On all of them had failed. Cypher escaped within hours. The details of how he accomplished this feat are not fully known, and what is known raises more questions than it answers. The official account speaks of the Great Rift's opening, of warp storms that temporarily disrupted the wards protecting Terra, of chaos throughout the Imperial Palace as reality itself seemed to fracture. During this confusion, Cypher and his fallen companions somehow broke their bonds and made their way out of the dark cells and into the palace proper. But here is where the story takes a strange turn. Having escaped from the most secure prison in the Imperium, Cypher did not flee Terra. He did not seek to escape into the vastness of space where he could disappear as he had so many times before. Instead, he made his way deeper into the Imperial Palace, fighting through the defenders who sought to stop him. His destination became clear to those tracking his progress, and the realization sent shockwaves through the command structure of Terra's defenders. Cypher was not fleeing outward toward escape. He was moving inward toward the most protected location in the entire galaxy. He was heading for the throne room. He was heading for the Emperor. The pursuit that followed was unlike anything the Imperial Palace had seen since the siege of Terra itself, 10,000 years before, when the forces of Horus had battered against these very walls. Dark angels who had infiltrated the palace seeking Cypher clashed with the forces pursuing him, their obsession with capturing the Lord of the Fallen overriding their normal protocols and authorization. Assassins from the Officio, Assassinorum, were deployed to eliminate the escaped prisoner, their specialized killing techniques brought to bear against a target that had evaded death for longer than most civilizations had existed. Custodians abandoned their posts throughout the palace to converge on the Lord of the Fallen's location, recognizing that whatever Cypher intended, it could not be allowed to happen. And through it all, Cypher kept moving. He fought his way through every obstacle with his twin pistols blazing, leaving a trail of bodies that would have been impressive even for a space marine at the height of his powers. He seemed to know the palace's layout better than its defenders, finding paths through areas that had been sealed for centuries, exploiting weaknesses in the security network that should not have existed. And every time the pursuers thought they had him cornered, he slipped away through some unexpected route, always moving closer to his goal. He used a forgotten pathway called the Path of Martyrs, an ancient route through the palace that had been constructed during the Age of Strife and largely forgotten since then. He crossed the Bridge of Ascension, a span of impossible architecture that had witnessed the footsteps of saints and heroes across the millennia. With each step, he came closer to the Emperor's throne room than any unauthorized being had been in thousands of years. The defenders throwing themselves against him were among the most elite warriors in the Imperium, yet he carved through them with terrifying efficiency. And then, at the very threshold of his apparent goal, he stopped. A custodian warden named Hecaron, badly wounded from the fighting, blocked his path. The custodian should not have been able to stand, let alone fight, but he raised his weapon and spoke two words that changed everything. Not yet. Hecaran claimed to have received a vision from the Emperor himself. Whether this claim was true, whether the Master of Mankind actually communicated his will to a wounded guardian at that crucial moment, cannot be verified. But Cypher's reaction speaks volumes. The Lord of the Fallen, who had fought through countless opponents to reach this point, who had seemed utterly committed to entering the throne room, simply accepted the message. He turned around and left. Not fled, not retreated in defeat, simply left, as if the two words had satisfied some condition that made his presence unnecessary, or as if the message confirmed something he had suspected all along. Not yet. The implications are staggering. If the message truly came from the Emperor, then the Master of Mankind knows of Cypher's existence and apparently has plans for him. Plans that have not yet reached their fulfillment. Plans that require Cypher to wait. Wait for what? After his escape from the Imperial Palace, Cypher disappeared once again into the galaxy. The Dark Angels and the Adeptus Custodes both launched pursuit forces, tracking him across the stars. The Custodian Shield Captain Dareth leads a combined force of Custodians and Sisters of Silence in an ongoing hunt that has already taken them across the Great Rift into the Imperium Nihilus. Behind them, unknown to the hunters, follows a Dark Angels strike cruiser with its insignia concealed. The First Legion's own forces pursuing their ancient nemesis. The hunt continues. Cypher remains free. The sword on his back remains undrawn. And somewhere in the depths of the throne room, on the golden throne that sustains his ruined body, the Emperor of Mankind waits. Does he know what Cypher carries? Does he know what the Lord of the Fallen intends to do with it? Does he look forward to that eventual meeting, or does he dread it? Not yet, the message said. Not yet, but someday. The ultimate question, hero or villain? After 10,000 years of history, after countless sightings and conflicts and theories, after libraries worth of speculation and analysis, we are left with the fundamental question that has driven this entire discussion. Is Cypher a hero or a villain? Is he working to save the Imperium or destroy it? Is he loyal to the Emperor or dedicated to his downfall? Does he serve purposes beyond mortal comprehension, or is he simply a survivor pursuing his own agenda in a galaxy that would destroy him if it could? The evidence for Cypher's loyalty is substantial if circumstantial. Despite his status as a fallen angel, despite 10,000 years of opportunity, he has never fully aligned himself with the forces of chaos. He has fought alongside traitors when it served his purposes, but he has also fought against them on numerous occasions. His interventions in imperial affairs have often produced beneficial outcomes, strengthening systems and populations that might otherwise have fallen to corruption or incompetence. The planets he has visited emerge from his presence stronger than they were before, their weaknesses exposed and corrected. Their populations hardened against the threats that surround them. He has saved the life of a loyalist Primarch, risking his own existence to rescue Reboot Gilliman from chaos captivity, when no one else could have accomplished the task. He has fought against the Thousand Suns on Luna, turning his weapons against the servants of the Dark Gods at a moment when their victory seemed assured. He has reached the gates of the throne room, only to turn away at what he interpreted as the Emperor's command, obeying a message that might have come from the Master of Mankind himself. If Cypher were truly a servant of chaos, his behavior makes no sense whatsoever. He has had countless opportunities to cause catastrophic damage to the Imperium, and he has not taken them. He has had chances to strike at the heart of humanity's civilization, and he has walked away. He has been offered power and position by the ruinous powers, and by all accounts, he has refused. A traitor would have acted differently. A servant of the Dark Gods would have pursued different goals. The evidence for Cypher's treachery is equally substantial, equally compelling, equally impossible to dismiss. He is a fallen angel, one of those who turned against the Lion and the Emperor during the Horus Heresy. He has spent millennia evading the justice of the Dark Angels, warriors who have devoted themselves to hunting the fallen and making them repent for their sins before granting them the Emperor's peace. He carries a sword that he never draws, a weapon that might be intended to strike down the Emperor himself. And he has, on various occasions, acted in ways that have harmed Imperial interests and cost Imperial lives. If Cypher were truly loyal, his behavior also makes no sense whatsoever. Why hide from those who share his allegiance? Why work in the shadows when he could work openly? Why allow himself to be branded a traitor when he could clear his name and prove his loyalty? The answer, perhaps, is that Cypher is neither hero nor villain in any simple sense. He is something more complicated, something that transcends the binary categories we use to make sense of the galaxy. He is an agent of change in a universe that resists change. He is a mystery in a setting that claims to have all the answers. He is a single figure who represents the possibility that nothing is certain, that even the most fundamental truths might be more complicated than they appear. And consider what Cypher represents to the Dark Angels. He is their greatest shame made manifest, proof that even the First Legion could not maintain perfect loyalty, evidence that the heroes they venerate were capable of the most terrible betrayal. The very existence of the Fallen undermines everything the Dark Angels claim to be. It suggests that their traditions of honor and duty, their reputation as the most loyal of all the Emperor's servants, are built on foundations of lies and suppression. Every time Cypher appears, every time he escapes their grasp, he reminds them of truths they have spent 10,000 years trying to bury. But he is also their greatest hope, the possibility that the sins of the past might somehow be redeemed, that absolution might be achieved through means that have not yet been attempted. If Cypher truly carries the Lion Sword, if he truly intends to present it before the Emperor and beg forgiveness for the fallen, then he represents something the Dark Angels have been seeking for 10,000 years. He represents absolution, but this hope terrifies them almost as much as it attracts them. Because if Cypher can achieve redemption, it means the Dark Angels' entire approach to the fallen has been wrong. It means the centuries of hunting and torture and execution might have been unnecessary, even counterproductive. It means the inner circle has perpetuated a cycle of shame and secrecy that served no purpose but to protect their own pride. So the Dark Angels continue to hunt Cypher, even knowing that his capture might not serve their true interests. They pursue him because they must, because their traditions demand it. Perhaps because to do otherwise would be to admit that everything they believe might be wrong, and Cypher continues to evade them, as he has for 10,000 years, as he perhaps will for 10,000 more. Conclusion. So we reach the end of our journey together, though Cypher's journey continues across the stars. We have traveled through time and space, from the death world of Caliban to the corridors of the Imperial Palace itself. We have explored theories and possibilities, evidence and speculation, the known and the unknowable. We have examined the history of a title that predates the Imperium, the destruction of a world that should have been the First Legion's triumph, and the scattering of warriors who would carry their shame across 10,000 years. And we have arrived, inevitably, at mystery. And Cypher remains the most enigmatic figure in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, precisely because he refuses to be understood. Every time we think we have grasped his purpose, he does something that confounds our expectations. Every time we think we have categorized him, he slips free of our labels and disappears back into the shadows from which he came. He is not simply unknown, but actively unknowable, a figure whose very existence challenges our assumption that the universe can be comprehended. And perhaps that is exactly as it should be. In a setting defined by its grimness, by its certainties of war and death and corruption, by the endless grinding of opposing forces locked in eternal conflict, Cypher represents something precious and rare. He represents the unknown, where he represents the possibility that the universe is larger and stranger than any codex or rulebook can capture. He represents mystery itself, preserved across the millennia like a flame cupped against the wind, burning on despite everything that would extinguish it. In the vast darkness of the 41st millennium, where certainty usually means only the certainty of suffering, where knowledge typically brings nothing but despair, Cipher offers something different. He offers doubt. He offers uncertainty. He offers the tantalizing possibility that the future is not yet written, that fate can be defied, that even the most ancient of prophecies might be proven wrong. For the dark angels, he is a torment and a shame. For us, watching from outside the story, he is something far more valuable. He is proof that this universe can still surprise us, that there are still secrets worth keeping, that some mysteries deserve to remain mysteries forever. We do not know who Cipher truly is. We do not know what he wants. We do not know whether he will ultimately prove friend or foe to the Imperium of mankind. But we know that he exists, that he persists, that he continues to move through the galaxy according to purposes that remain forever his own. And in a universe without hope, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, that mystery might be the closest thing to hope we have. Because if Cipher's purpose remains hidden, then the future remains unwritten. If even the dark angels cannot predict what he will do, then perhaps fate itself is less certain than we believed. As perhaps there are still possibilities that no one has foreseen, still outcomes that no prophecy has predicted, still hope where hope was thought impossible. Somewhere out there, beyond the light of known stars, across the vast and terrible darkness that separates the worlds of humanity, a figure in bone-white robes and ancient armor makes his way toward a destiny that no one can foresee. A bolt pistol in one hand, worn smooth by 10,000 years of use. A plasma pistol in the other, its mechanisms humming with contained fury. A sword across his back that has not been drawn since the destruction of Caliban, waiting for a moment that has not yet arrived. Cipher walks on, and the galaxy watches, and waits, and wonders. Thank you all so much for joining me on this journey through one of the most fascinating mysteries in all of Warhammer 40,000 lore. We have walked together through 10,000 years of history, explored the depths of secrets that the Dark Angels would kill to protect, and contemplated questions that may never have answers. I hope that you found yourself drawn into Cipher's enigma, that you felt the weight of his mystery pressing upon your imagination, that for a little while at least, the grim darkness of the far future became a place you wanted to explore rather than escape. If you enjoyed this exploration into the shadows of the Imperium, if you want to continue discovering the secrets and mysteries that define this incredible universe, I would be deeply honored if you would subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Your support makes these deep dives possible. It allows me to spend the time and effort required to do justice to these complex topics. It tells me that there are people out there who share my fascination with the dark corners of the galaxy, who want to understand the stories that lurk beneath the surface of the endless war. There are so many more mysteries to explore together, so many more secrets to uncover, so many more questions to ask that may never receive answers. The universe of Warhammer 40,000 is vast beyond comprehension, filled with tales of heroism and horror, of sacrifice and betrayal, of hope against all odds and despair in the face of inevitable doom. I want to share all of it with you, one story at a time, one mystery at a time, one journey into the darkness at a time. Until we meet again, may the Emperor protect you on all your travels through the stars. And if you happen to see a hooded figure with twin pistols passing through the shadows of your world, if you catch a glimpse of bone-white robes and green ceramite in the corner of your eye, if you feel the weight of ancient purpose pressing upon the air around you, well, perhaps it's best not to look too closely. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved by mortal minds. Some questions are their own answer. Cipher abides, as he has for 10,000 years, as he will for however long this story continues to be told. And we, who have shared this journey together, are privileged to witness even a small part of his mystery. Until next time, friends, the Emperor protects.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.